Hi, thanks for tuning in to my landscape sculpting series. In today's video, we're going to talk about setting up to use the landscape brushes or landscape stamps and what's the best way to get going. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to just open a new level up, kind of show you the workflow I like to use for a new environment to easily see the brushes and whatnot. So the first thing we'll do is delete the BSP brush, and we'll go over here, and there's lots of things that we need to talk about between resolutions and etc. But one of the first things I want to talk about, what's the difference between a stamp and a brush? Well, a landscape stamp is basically a bigger version of a feature, a structure, something like a cliff or a plateau or a crater, a defined piece of land. So we make those brushes to be used at a higher resolution of 8,192. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. Brushes are more of the micro brushes. They're designed to be brushes for 2048, and they're used for sculpting and also for painting. So you can use them either or. Some brushes are better at painting than sculpting, and vice versa. And then some brushes are actually better at higher resolutions or lower resolutions. And there's a lot of things to really talk about for the resolution. And leading into that is how do we set that up? So by default, we've remade all the brushes to and landscape stamps to run on the default settings. So when you go into a new project, you come over here, and we see this overall resolution of 505, 63 by 63 quads, 1 by 1 section, 8 by 8. That's the default setting. And what we need to do is go ahead and create that landscape here. We have our material. If we go to landscape demo room materials, and we can find that automatic terrain landscape material, and we'll go ahead and apply it to it, which is right here, and create. And so basically what happens is that the resolution makes a big difference on how small you can go on a brush. So let's just go over that real quickly. Before I do that though, I do want to make some changes to the map to make it easier to follow. So I'll go ahead and change this mode out. And what I want to do is go ahead and change my exposure, because I don't like the HDR effect of exposure going in and out. So I'll go ahead and set it to a fixed level of 1. All right, and the other thing is I don't like the shadows, so it's really annoying, the message, so I'll go ahead and go to light source, and I want to go ahead and turn off does not cast shadows. And the next thing I want to do is, as we sculpt, we want to be able to see the backside really nicely, so we need to go ahead and add a skylight. So I'll add that in here and bring that up. And I also like to turn off cast shadows on that. The reason is so we can see everything around. We won't have to worry about those black lines all the time interfering with the look, and I just think it looks weird. So all right, so we got that set up. So the resolution right now we have set as default, and what I want to do is go ahead and create a brush. We'll go ahead and load up a stamp for this example. Go to Sculpt and go to Circle and change that to Alpha, and I'll go ahead and change this to Stamp Cliff. So Cliff 1 is good for me right now, and that's a good one for the example. Double click on it. Okay. All right. So now, by default, for the stamps, they're made for 8,192 for the size. So we'll go ahead and do strength of 10 and do one quick click. All right. So basically, now what we have is this pretty good size stamp. As we go smaller and smaller, let's go ahead and go down to, let's say, 1024. Oh, actually, we'll go to, let's go default size for the stamp, and we'll go down to the vertexes that's available on the landscape. You can start to see it's starting to get a little more pointy, right, because there's a lot less vertex to spread that information across, so it's got to get compressed down, and you'll start seeing pointy edges and fall-offs really quickly. So at this level, that's still usable. You can go in there and use a smoothing brush to smooth those points out. But let's say let's go smaller, right? Let's say we want to get a really small feature, and this time we want to go to 1024. And we do that, and you see the details are starting to go away really quick. And if we would go to like 512, it's pretty much not even usable at that point. So if we look straight up and down, I'll click a few times, and you'll see you get these really weird points because there's not enough vertexes to encapsulate all that data to represent it. So now if I go and hit escape, go here, and then I want to go ahead and from current camera location, hit play, and kind of see the scale of where these are at. Right, so here's my third person dude. So that was the 512 brush, and over there was the 1024, and so on. You start seeing the resolutions go up. Now, so we design, when we have that data going up and down, it causes more compression, causing a different banding. So what I want to show you is if you don't want to use default resolution, I'll show you the other extreme, which takes more performance. For all series, I'll be using the default, but for this one video, I'll show you guys how to set the sculpting vertexes higher so you have more detail for smaller scale details in case your project was something that wanted to use those kind of details. So I'll go ahead and go to the landscape. Actually, I just want to delete this one. Let's get this bad boy out of there. Delete it, and I'll go over here, landscape tool, and what I want to do is let's go nuts. Let's go to 255. 2x2 sections, and then we're good to go. We can also, max that out, so it's gonna be pretty ridiculous. And then we can also change the scale to shrink it all down by 10. Make sure you get the Z2 because that's important for height maps. All right, so now we have a really nice look at the density. Right, we have a ridiculous density on the map itself. So I'll go ahead and create that, and that's gonna take a moment or two here. And there's actually some tips I'll talk about for lag. Some things that are, and this is version 4.17.2. There are some landscape editing gotchas, just using the tools itself. So the first thing I want to do is, now we got this new improved landscape here. I want to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm still at 512, and I'm going to go ahead and click it once. Look at that, 512 brush. Let's go crazy. Let's go down 256 brush. So as we scale those brushes down, as they still work pretty well, you can see this still has pretty good detail for a 256 size brush. And just for reference, let's go ahead and go back into our character. And you can see we're even getting smaller and smaller on the detail. So there's a reference for landscape sculpting. So those resolutions, as you get higher resolution, that's a lot more vertexes on the screen. So that's definitely up to your project on how much of a canvas you want to paint with. That also goes hand in hand with the texture painting too. So anyways, let's go ahead and go back to the, I like to go back and do the default settings for everything because, that's the most optimized version of the landscape. Let's go ahead. I do use a one resolution higher for a personal project, so that's just going up one resolution gets away from those curved, jaggy lines that you see when you start making some of those mountains. So I definitely recommend going up one resolution. It's not too bad of a performance hit at all. So let's go ahead and create that default landscape. Let's say default, buddy, default 505. That's how you know we're back in the ballpark. Hit create. Now, some of the things I want to talk about as far as workflow. So basically, this stamp is used at 8192 for default map settings. This is a good size. Now, you can actually go bigger than what it allows you here. You can actually go many times bigger, but I wouldn't recommend going past 16,384 because you start getting the opposite problem, which is artifact compression. We don't have enough data to go that high. So you see one size bigger is really, really nice. In fact, I do use that size quite a bit. So I'll go hit play, and you can see that's a really nice sculpt. Just boom, there you go. You have a nice little cliff here you can get up on. But if you start going even higher than that, it gets more lag as far as painting. So if we go to, let's say 30,000, let's go 32,000. 1, 2, 3. It'll go up to 65,536, I think. All right, let's go ahead and click it once. But you see, wow, it's really, really big now. So what you'll start getting, now it is usable at the size. Don't get me wrong. There's no reason why you can't use it. But you'll need to know that sometimes you start some of these dimplings. I call it dimpling. And it's basically you start seeing the bands of artifact compression for the texture size. So there's data that has to interpolate between one vertex to the next off the texture. So you start seeing the bands as you start getting more greater in size or less in more vertexes. So you have this problem on a higher resolution sculpt that you're trying to imprint more information or not enough information on the available vertexes there. So that makes sense. You start seeing some banding that comes along, but you start seeing it here, and all that stuff can be taken care of with a smooth. Just go there and start smoothing out with a smooth breath. It works really nice. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is some lag. So basically, you saw the I said, okay, something I use a lot, it's really frustrating in the editor, is how to use undo. So I want to show you guys something, a really big hassle. Let's hit tilde and type in stat FPS. All right, now you see my frame rate, it's 120 frames per second, which is great for sculpting. I can sculpt all day long, but the problem is if I hit Control Z, boom, you see that drop in frame rate, and then all of a sudden it went back 120. So once you do undo. And undo will actually drop your frame rate down to red. It does the undo process, but what's really draining is you see this tooltip will come up. So if you hit Control Z again, this tooltip down here is draining quite a bit of the FPS. And once those tooltips drop off, the frame rate will go back up to 120. So just as a tip, anytime you have these tooltips popping up, you're going to lag for a second. So don't sculpt during that lag. So whenever you're using the settings of your brush to sculpt the landscape, you'll get like 2 or 3 extra input pulses to it than you normally would with that lower frame rate. So I'll go ahead and show you one more thing. One thing you should notice too is some of these windows, as you click off of them, they could drain the FPS. So I always like to see the FPS to know if it's a setting of my map problem or if it's a setting of the editor problem. So for now, tooltips will cause a drop in FPS, so be aware of that problem. All right, so basically that's really all I want to go over in this first video on how to set up the brushes. It's just a lot of talk about resolution, what's the difference between a stamp. A stamp is a bigger structure. A brush is meant towards more of smaller micro details. So you have the macro details for the stamps, the micro details for the brushes. And then also a quick setup for the landscape. The material itself is automatic, showing the ridges versus the flat. And again, the watch outs for the tooltip lags. So again, if you have any questions so far, please feel free to leave a comment below and I'll get to that as soon as I can. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.